Yes, so I'm recording it now and we can start now. So the very first question which we have here is from myself. So how did you start your journey with Enactus? If you can just give us a little bit of history and how you got involved with it and how your experience has been until now.
I would be delighted to share that with you. And some of you have heard a little bit about this story in the past. So I started out my career as a lawyer. I was an attorney for many years. And I ended up working at a company that was a water technology company. And our goal was to create access to safe, clean water around the world, and we worked as a water technology. And while I was there, one of the things that I was most interested in is what we did as a company to support nonprofits who were working in that space. So as a potential funder of nonprofits through our foundation, I was invited through a dear friend who now happens to be my husband. I was invited to come meet Enactus at the Enactus World Cup, then called SIFE. So I traveled to Berlin, Germany, and I watched students on stage, and I was really surprised and amazed by what the students had accomplished already. But it was really in a top to future top where, like this, there were a bunch of business leaders and a bunch of students sitting at tables talking about big discussion items of the time, that I heard directly from students what being a part of Enactus really did for them. Right? I mean, your projects are astonishing, but the impact on you as a person and on your career and how you're thinking about the world is what's most important to me. And so I talked to these students for a long time about that, and afterwards started mentoring some of them. And by mentoring some of them, I formed relationships with them. I started to see more of what Enactus was doing. And as the daughter of an immigrant, it was really critical to me that somewhere in my life, I was creating more access for more people to more opportunities. So lo and behold, 10 years later, I took the job at Enactus as the president and CEO. Now, I have to say, it's been the privilege of a lifetime to do that, but it's also been one of the hardest jobs I've ever had. And it's really intellectually stimulating because I get to interact with students and young leaders and innovators and business thought leaders like you.
That's really amazing, and I completely understand how stimulating and hard this job might be, because obviously everybody is so pumping with energy. I can already see that in people's faces who join this meeting. Everybody wants to do something which they are passionate about, and that shows in their work. And it's really amazing to be a part of this community. And that's why our second question is about challenges the world faces today. So in your opinion, what are the most pressing challenges the world faces today, and what is your vision for the future? So this is by Ravi. He's in the meeting as well. And we'd love to know your answer for this.
Well, that's a big question, and I'm happy to answer it, but then I might ask some of you to tell me your answers as well. So I think there are two fundamental questions that we must as a global community address, and they're interrelated. The first is income inequality in every country in the world, and the second is climate and climate challenges, and they're interrelated, right? We know the impact of climate and its outsized a deleterious impact on people without resources. We know that the private sector, not just the government sector, and individuals all have a role to play in all of those issues. And so for me, creating new partnerships with organizations that bring really deep expertise on those two issues to Enactus students, so that you can, if you are compelled to learn about one or the other of them and how your projects might impact them, that's a very high priority for me. It's why we brought the Nature Conservancy to the Enactus World Cup and other organizations who are working on circular economy issues, on access to economic systems in rural parts of every country in the world. That's why we are forming those kinds of strategic partnerships. But that said, I know that we can't replace what you're learning in the classroom, and we don't want to. So what I want to do is bring people working on both of those issues and make them more accessible to all of you, so that you can understand how you can apply what you're trying to accomplish and what you're learning in school, and learn from people who have already been working in these spaces, right? And the other big piece of that for me is that, and this is a surprise, so listen carefully, I worked in the private sector for a long time, but it was shocking to me to learn that companies really hadn't been as actively engaged as they could have been, and they are today. And so there are companies that will drive more change on climate issues than any government could, any one government, because of their scale, because of their reach in their supply chain, and because of the ambitious goals that they set. And that's why this intersection of students with company leaders for me is so important. I would love to think that I was an entrepreneur, but I'm not an entrepreneur, right? But I understand how to use entrepreneurial skills to change organizations. And it's leaders like you and young students like you who are going into companies and demanding and creating that change in companies. And that has a remarkable impact. So Ravi, I'm curious, why did you ask that question and what's your answer?
Yeah, no, it was quite interesting to hear your response. I was just quite curious to see your perspective on it. I think it changes from where you're from as well and your upbringing, and people might have different answers based off of that. So it's quite interested to see what you have to say. I suppose for me as well, quite similar to what you said, it's the overarching issue of inequality in general. I think it's so large and broad that it really comes across every single issue like put forward by, say, the Sustainable Development Goals. Inequality is a factor in all of them. So I think that for me as well is a huge issue, and it kind of I think the ability to give equal opportunity to all is something that we should strive for. That's something I've seen as a big issue in many places that I've been to as well.
What about anybody else? Charmaine, I saw you nodding your head at one point, and you're in Malaysia on the other side of the planet from me. What is your view?
Yeah, I would just share about my passion toward Enactus. It was starting during 4 years back, where I noticed like Malaysia, every campus have their own Enactus. Then that is where I started to be very passionate on like, oh, how Enactus does and what kind of projects. I actually like take a look at other countries on how they did the projects. And today, unfortunately, when I actually made a few Enactus campus, some of them already, you know, like the volcano, right? When it erupts and when sometimes it remains dormant, and that's the kind of condition in Malaysia. And for me, I feel very disappointed, me myself, because I am a change maker, and there is it's some psychology lah, like it's called the moral. Sometimes people won't understand what kind of morality that Enactus is having at the west side, and sometimes because in the east side we have plenty of diversity. We have people from Asia, we have people from China, we have people from India. We have in Malaysia is very different because we have a mixture of everything. And yeah, for me here, what I'm doing, I actually already just graduated as a cognitive science student, and I standing firm here to be part as an alumni to actually help my juniors, help my future juniors to be part of Enactus, and had to tell the world in Malaysia, to tell them that, hey, actually Enactus is not just about business, it's about entrepreneurship, it's about people who taking the, like how Rachel mentioned about like bringing entrepreneur mindset into the company and making a difference for not just a particular issue. Sometimes it's just even for mental issues, even not just for environmental. I mean, at least you get the critical mindset, the problem solving mindset imbibed inside you to actually help more people. Because you know, sometimes there are a lot of big companies in Malaysia. It's just a lack of that critical thinking. Sometimes we feel that it's right because people are following it, but actually when we check all the factual evidence, is actually wrong. That's something that we need people to stand firm and like very true about themselves.
Thank you for that. One of the things that rings true from Ravi, your comments and yours, Charmaine, as well, is my favorite SDG, which is partnership, right? So as we think about addressing these together, what most impressed me when I met Enactus in 2009, when it was still called its old name, was that the teams were so diverse. And students told me they were global citizens, even in 2009, when we didn't really talk about what it meant to be part of one community, and we didn't emphasize in the same way, perhaps as a global community, what we do today in terms of our need for partnership and our interdependence. And that's where I think those comments come together, and it's why Global Goal 17, partnership, is my favorite global goal.
Yeah, I think that definitely throws light on a lot of different topics which we always want to address. And I really like the aspect of partnering with companies and motivating them to create an impact on the scale in which they can because of the reach they have. And that definitely, brings some kind of leadership skills in all of us and also in the people who are working in those jobs, because that gives them a sense of passion and purpose. And that brings us to our next question in terms of leadership. What do you think is the quality which influences leaders, and what qualities leaders should have in order to be a good leader?
Yeah, I'm looking down at some notes, Ravi, because I have a dear friend, a man named Bill George. He leads leadership at Harvard, actually. And we were talking recently about leadership, and I read a lot of different things about leadership. But the reality is there's really only one test for leadership at the end of the day. And it's whether you can bring people together to follow you or to achieve a result over a sustained period of time. And you all know this, there are thousands of books about leadership, and there are thousands of studies about what make good leaders. But at the end of the day, I firmly believe it's authenticity. Because different people lead in different ways. And we know, of course, there are some key skills and traits that are required to be a good leader, right? And I won't go through those with you because you know many of them, right? The ability to listen and to communicate well, the ability to be decisive, right? The ability to be empathetic with those on your team and those you're attempting to serve. But at the end of the day, these traits that allow you to bring people toward a result over a sustained period of time are what's most important. And I'm going to literally read those traits to you from my dear friend, because he was so clear about them. And the more I read about his work with leaders, the more I thought about how they applied to me and what I could learn from them. And we all have something to learn every day about leadership. The first is pursuing your purpose with passion, right? And I know all of you, almost every person I've ever met at Enactus has this core emphasis. My passion to create opportunity for students like you comes from my personal history. My mother was a refugee. She was forced to flee her home when she was 5 years old, and she lived in 10 countries. She traveled 20,000 miles before the age of 12 years old. She came to America as a teenager with no money, and she had to create a life. And I know that talent lives everywhere. It lives in all of you, and it lives in all of our friends and colleagues around the world, but opportunity doesn't live everywhere. So my personal passion for leading Enactus is linked to creating opportunities for more people. The second one for me is integrity. For Bill George's view, and for many's view, it's about acting with solid values. To me, the core of those values is integrity and honesty. Leading with your heart, not just your head, and that encompasses all sorts of skills, right? Not just the ability to listen, but the ability to listen empathetically, the ability to communicate clearly, the ability to communicate hard messages even when it's difficult to do so. We did a lot of that this year at Enactus. right? The pandemic and its economic impact had a really big impact on Enactus. And I had to deliver very difficult messages to our team. I'm sure you did as well for your teams. That core skill leads all the way back to how you communicate, not just with your head, knowing what you have to communicate, but with your heart. Establishing connected relationships, that encompasses loyalty and all of the other traits I just talked about, and then demonstrating your own set of self-discipline as an example for your team. Those are kind of the 5 traits I focus on when I think about leadership, but they encompass a much wider array of skills that every one of us as individuals brings to the table. So if you think about leadership as a task, right, which is to bring people along on a sustained journey to achieve whatever it is you've set out to achieve, part of, or the core perhaps of all of that, is knowing yourself. And that's something that evolves by the day, that we all work on, no matter whether you're 19 or 29 or 90. And I would challenge all of you, and I know you do because this is embedded in so much of the teamwork I see in Enactus, to spend time understanding your strengths and surrounding yourself with teammates who appreciate them, but also supplement where you aren't so strong. I'd love to hear comments and feedback about that, because many of you are young leaders, and I take my hats off to you, because I don't think I would have had the courage to join Enactus when I was in college. I didn't know myself very well yet, and it would have been intimidating to me to do it. Not everybody's a leader, and not everybody's an entrepreneur, and Enactus welcomes everyone, right? So talk to me a little bit about why you joined and what the challenge is for you in working on your teams as leaders. Anybody?
I think personally, Enactus is such a huge community that it really, it sparks that entrepreneurial spirit in you, no matter where you come from. And it helps you find yourself in a way, because you're working in such a dynamic environment on so many different projects, and you are leading such a diverse team, that it really builds that confidence in you. And I feel that connection is really important during that time. It's really important to understand how you can connect to your team in a way that you really, you drive that empathetic factor in a way. And I really align to that. And I think authenticity is really important in that way. But I feel some of the major challenges would really be sometimes being not aligned with people, like sometimes we may have conflicts in thoughts, or, we might not know how to react in a situation, which is really hard to solve in a team, that some people have different opinions, and there are certain rules which we need to follow, and they're not following those rules. I think those are some of the things which we face, and Enactus has so many rules in itself, and we need to align with those rules. And sometimes people get so excited that they just want to scale it in different directions, and we can't. And that has happened with me myself. There's so many times when I just want to scale it in all directions, but I need to narrow it down and understand that I need to be realistic. And that is something which comes in when you're dealing with these organizations and companies, that you need to scale yourself down, narrow yourself down, and be realistic. So that is one of the obstacles I think is there.
Well, it's interesting. One of the questions you'd sent me in advance was about scaling a business, right? And leadership has this very interesting path. It's the same discipline, right? The first trait I mentioned is understand your purpose with passion, right? So what is your personal mission? What is your business's mission? Stay true to that, and have the self-discipline, one of the other traits I talked about, to challenge yourself to stay true. One of the reasons so many social enterprises don't scale is that they pursue growth. They want to do so much more than their core mission really demands and asks of them, and they lose focus. And the same is true for leaders, right? You can very easily lose focus when you don't stay true to your own personal mission or your own personal passion. And by the way, my passion has evolved over my career. So the other thing I would say to you as you think about your life is, I started out as an attorney, and there was one key thread through all of my career that stayed the same, which was I wanted to create opportunity for more people. When I was a lawyer, I was doing it through law, then I went into other fields, but that was the one thread that tied it all together. But here's the thing, when I was making those career choices and making those changes, I couldn't have defined that very well. I couldn't see it until I was in my late 30s, and I'm old. So when I was in my late 30s, I finally went, oh wait, every job I've chosen has one common thread, the ability to make impact and create opportunity for other people. That must be my core mission. But I didn't have Enactus in college. I didn't define that clearly. And maybe I would have made different choices, I'm not sure. But you will find that thread. And as long as you're true to that thread, I'm confident you'll find rewarding pathways no matter what you pursue.
That's true. That's very, really true. Like when we started GirlScriptireland, we also, thought that we just want to help other people. And that is how we just scaled it. Like we opened it to everybody. And then we met so many people along our journey, and we just tried to scale the team. And it's just something which is rewarding, even though there is work involved in the background. It is still a very rewarding experience to be part of such a community. And that is what everybody in this team must be relating to, because they are doing that in their own Enactus communities. They are already creating a difference, and it's all because of the communities they are empowering. So I would just ask one more question and then open it to the audience so that people can just engage more. So one question which I personally want to know is, what advice would you have for us as university students trying to create an impact on people and trying to actually make a change with our own social enterprises and initiatives?
So there are so many different pieces of advice you will receive from so many different people. But for me, what we just talked about is what remains core, right? So remember what drives you and channel that as a leader to influence those around you, right? It's when we deviate from what our authentic passion is, our authentic reason for pursuing our enterprise. When we deviate from that is when we either get into trouble personally or we lead our organization into trouble. And that's a hard thing to do when you see opportunities to expand or to stretch in a different way. And I think the discipline piece of what you're about to embark on in your career path is trying to stay true to whatever it is, that little voice that led you to Enactus in the first place is probably linked to your personal mission. So staying true to that in such a really challenging world right now is going to be my biggest piece of advice to you. Now, how do you do that? That's the hard challenge. I happen to do it by taking walks in the woods and asking myself a series of questions about what I've done this past week, how my interactions with my team were, and what I'm learning from those interactions, right? I know when I've been a bad leader or I've failed my team, right? I know it. And we all have those days where we're not at our best. But when you take time to really, just in your own quiet, think about, did you deliver for your team? And did you advance your mission? You usually find your answer. And staying true to that in such a difficult economic time for so many people, and frankly, such a terrifying time from a health perspective, is really a challenge. And I know in different countries, we are all feeling that very differently. I know Germany is going through lockdown again right now. The US is hitting record numbers of infection rates and likely hospitalization to come very soon. It's a challenging time for us. So it makes it ever more important for you to stay true to that personal mission.
Actually, just a follow-up question with that would be, I mean, how do we take risks to stay absolutely true to what exactly our passion is? And the risk could be anything. It could be quitting a safe job. It could be leaving everything behind, moving somewhere else. How do we just trust the process and understand that if we do this, then we would be happy and everything will fall into place? It would be taking, so many bold steps to just quit that job which is actually earning money, giving you that financial security, and then just moving in that process. So would you have any advice with that?
Yeah, I would challenge you all to actually to think about that question. I stayed in jobs that I didn't think were good for me because I needed to earn money. I wanted to contribute to my family and to those around me. And so rather than leaving those jobs at times, I found within that job the ability to be true to what powered me. So leaving that job and pursuing the passion, whatever that passion might be, isn't always the right answer and isn't always, frankly, feasible. And I don't think it's actually externally driven, that ability to pursue what it is that's important to you. It's internally driven. So whether you work in a consulting firm or a manufacturing plant, whether you work in retail or in law, you can find a way to channel your personal mission into that environment if it's an appropriate way to drive change. And I would encourage you to, I remember being 20, vaguely, it was a very long time ago, but I remember being 20 and feeling like I had to choose between a job that would be a career path and give me a good income that I could contribute to, and other things that I thought aligned with my passion. And I chose the first and found my passion within it. I don't think they're very often two separate things. I think the beauty of life is finding the overlap and then exploring it further, right? And that's what I did when I worked at a water company. I was working as a lawyer in mergers and acquisitions. My job was to work with the teams around the world to find new businesses to buy and bring them into our umbrella. But in doing that, my question for all of our teams was, what are we doing in your country to improve access to water for people? And how can our foundation support that as well? It wasn't really in my job scope, right? But it was the question that propelled me. How do I create more opportunity for more people? And it led me down a completely different set of opportunities within that company and then in the broader world, right? So I would encourage you to always keep that in mind, regardless of what circumstance you're in, regardless of what country you live in and what job you have. Does that make sense? I see some people nodding their heads.
Definitely, it makes sense. I feel that even if you're working, you can definitely find some time to follow your passion or try and create a difference in the workplace itself, which drives you. And I actually learned this from a manager at my internship recently. He was a person who would involve himself in everything and try and make a difference there, try and solve problems, even if that business unit was not relevant to him. And I really felt that he was really inspirational in that way, that he would do whatever it takes to solve those challenging problems, even if there is no benefit or return into it, that particular department which he's working in. So that really kind of serves as an example of how you could create that difference you really want to create, even in the workplace. And initiatives like Enactus definitely help us understand and think about these questions from an early age to understand what really matters to us. And now with this, I can open it to the audience so that people can unmute themselves, talk, and interact a little bit more if they have any particular questions for Rachel.
I see a question in the chat, and before I answer it, I'm going to ask you all to answer it. The question is, what do you think the new normal will be after the pandemic? And by saying after the pandemic, at least for me, I mean once we have a vaccine, right? What do you think the new normal will be in your country or in your community?
More working in home, definitely. Yeah.
You think we won't go back to big offices, huh?
I don't think people would want to go back, at least full time. I'd say it'd be like 50-50, like maybe half the week at the office and then the other half at home. That sounds like a good deal as well.
Do other people agree?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, I'm the kind of person who would just love to, go outside, go to the office and come back. I still have that in me, but I do agree a little bit that yes, there are some people who just adapted it so well that they wouldn't want to go back to the office and the workplace and having to get up in the morning and commute and everything. So that is a huge difference.
I feel like the option will be open to us a lot more than like before.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that itself is a huge change, I think, in the new normal.
So for those of you who love being around other people, is that a good change? I see some no's out there.
I would say it's an adaptable change because people will now start, I don't know if trust is the right word, but would be comfortable using the online platform more. Like if you want to just hang out with friends, so like earlier you could just go out, but if you have an option and you've already done that with your friends before the vaccine, you might think twice, like, I'm lazy, let's do it online. But you wouldn't do that before, right? So I
Right.
think in general also people would be more just okay with the online platform, especially in education, because I think it'll almost be a year till, all the students are studying online and like working from home. So I think they also will start accepting that fact that, many people don't trust education as an online because they're not meeting the teacher, they're not asking their doubts. But now it is how it is. So I think they'll start trusting or like accepting the fact as well. Yeah.
So that's an interesting point. I'm curious, from a show of hands, or at least online, a show of hands, how many of you, if after a vaccine, if you're still in school, would prefer to take classes online still, or at least partially online?
No, I wouldn't.
No,
I still
you
wouldn't.
I would.
Interesting. You wouldn't like the option. You would want to be back in person.
Yeah, for me,
Yeah.
because for me, I actually had my Enactus projects around Sarawak, and now I have to go back to my hometown, and everything is new to me. So I have to start from scratch at my own hometown, where actually my inspiration came from the campus that is need to take a flight back to the Borneo Island to continue my project. So it is something very new to me.
Interesting. All right. I'm taking a note about that. Hey, I saw another note in the chat about having personal goals driving us, but the challenge of bringing a team together around shared goals, a common purpose, right? That's the greatest challenge of leadership, right? So let me ask a little bit for all of you first. How is it that you and your teams decide what goal to pursue? What things have you learned from going through the process of trying to align people around a shared goal?
I think something that worked in our teams is educating people about the goal that we're most passionate about. Because I know I worked with a project called Head Starts that worked with people with intellectual disabilities. Yeah.
Fantastic project.
Yeah, so I recruited volunteers as well, and most of them didn't know including myself actually, didn't know the issues surrounding people with intellectual disabilities. But once we got to know of them and we knew that there was something we could do to help them, that drove us even more. And I think that's educating people about issues and showing them that there's a way to help is something that really brings a team together, at least in my experience.
Great answer.
Another thing I would say would be like to come together as a team. It's very important to listen because everyone is not the same person as you or on the same page at what you are. So I think an important thing would also be listening to what is their perspective of the goal, what impact means to them, or how they want to change it. Because you might even get better ideas, or we'll just get to know how we can be together and maybe collaborate or just share the common goal.
Yeah, one of the things I love both of those answers, especially the listening, because it can so strengthen, right, the process and the outcomes. One of the things I would encourage you all to think about too is, there's the challenge defining the problem and then defining the answer. And both of those benefit from both listening more effectively and educating people about the parameter, but thinking about your business plan and bringing a variety of strengths to your business plan to ensure that you're building something that will endure, that has sustainable impact, is one way to bring people under an umbrella, right? Because we all have a desire. We're all here because we have a desire to create positive change. And if we really want to do that, we want to build enterprises that endure and sustain beyond us, right? Or beyond our team, perhaps. So bringing people into that business planning process, I think, is one of the most critical things that we can do as a team. And some teams in some countries emphasize that step more than others. But I encourage you all to think about how your team does that and how you might do that more effectively going forward.
If anybody wants to ask specifically something, they can just unmute themselves and go for it.
Something that I wanted to know your perspective on is, I know how you said you were passionate about income inequality as well as climate change. And something that I wanted to know is, have you found the private sector, and by that I mean profit motive companies, to be doing enough in terms of equality? And something that I find really, something that I don't agree with is on the application forms. Some of the application forms ask our religion, they ask our ethnicity, and sometimes it feels like tokenism, like they're just trying to put it on their numbers or in their statistics. And I'm someone who I would love to see women in leadership positions as well, but obviously I as well want that to be purely because of merit, and not just because they're a woman. I know it's a systematic problem, not just the companies, but how do you think those sectors are doing enough? And if not, how can they do more? And how can we sort of change the system there in terms of inequality?
It's a great question and a huge one, and it varies pretty dramatically. But let me tell you two things about myself before I answer. First, I'm an eternal optimist, right? I very much appreciate that there has never been a better time in the world to live than there is today, right now, even with everything we are facing. Number one. Number two, I'm a constant striver, right? There's no such thing as perfection, but there are always improvements to make. So I think the private sector has made some really important steps. And I could call out some companies over others, right? Some companies have leaders who value and prioritize this over others. I think where companies have a great opportunity to improve is how they do exactly what you just highlighted, which is how do they create more opportunities for more people and evaluate more people on merit in light of all the systemic issues that we have and all the institutions that create the very inequality we're trying to address. And so I come back to partnership, right? It won't be only the private sector that will make dramatic change alone. It involves the education system. It involves our government systems in every country. And we know there's dramatic differences between different countries on these issues. It involves our cultural and civil norms, right? And in America, if any good has come of this year, it is that we are having a much more candid conversation than we've ever had on racial inequality alone, not on gender inequality. That's been replaced in the temporary minds of Americans with racial inequality. But I will commend the private sector, and I continue to, on their willingness to continue to stay focused on this issue, even if every step that they take doesn't advance as quickly as we'd like. I do think the corporate sector has done a tremendous job, and I think they've actually pushed governments to do the same. Because if a large employer in a country, in any country, wants to recruit a more diverse employee base in that country, they need an education system that gives opportunity for all diversities of thought, of gender, of equality, of race, right? To be able to come through that educational system. So I think not only does the private sector do a good job of trying new ways to address this issue, but I think they do a tremendous job of challenging others who influence institutions to do the same. Is there more to do? Absolutely. Absolutely. And like you, there were times in my career where I felt like I was a token. I will tell you, my first job as a lawyer, I was the only female lawyer in that office in this huge firm across all of America. I was the only female lawyer. And I know that many people thought I was there only because I was a female. And that wasn't true, but I had to work twice as hard to prove it. And the reality is we all bring our biases to the table. So while we'll never be able to eliminate all of the inequalities that we face, we have tremendous strides to make in a few key areas across multiple countries. And I'm hopeful that we'll do that. Again, I am, because I'm an optimist.
Thank you so much. That really brought to light a lot of different perspective for me. And you can even see it in the UN reports. I think we have been seeing the inequality gaps reducing over the years, and I suppose the private sector had a lot to do with it as well. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. You know, I thank you for the question. One of the things that is interesting about working at Enactus and leading Enactus is that we have an opportunity to talk to so many companies, as well as so many parts of the UN about these issues. Yeah. And it's really a privilege to know, and I want you to know, that most people in the private sector who are working on this issue are really very passionate about it. It's very meaningful to them, and I could call out a few of our partners who are in particular very focused on it. So I encourage you to give companies feedback when you're going through these processes as well, and to give them suggestions. Because that's the other part of this that makes me so optimistic. It's such a privilege to work with so many people who care about these issues and are trying things. And I would rather see somebody try and fail than not try at all.
Definitely. Thanks so much. I'll keep that in mind to be giving them feedback.
Thank you so much for that. Actually, we have another question in the chat, which I missed. It's basically from Thomas, and he says, how hard was it to do the Enactus World Cup online? And how hard was it to adapt and get everyone on the same page? That's actually a really good question.
That's a great question. So first of all, show of hands, how many of you got to be a part of the World Cup, even if just for a little while? I can't see. Show of hands, even for those not on screen. Use your reaction. Okay, so not that many. I'm sad to see that. Well, adapting Enactus World Cup online was a huge challenge because we didn't know how to start. But the great opportunity that brought our team together right away, and I don't think we did a very good job, if the show of hands on this call is any indication, is that we understood right away, wow, if we can do something online, we could have every student in Enactus around the world. We could have 70,000 students online meeting each other. That's the first time we've ever been able to bring more than just a very small section of students together. And for me, I think the greatest opportunity that Enactus as an organization has, and I'd like to hear from all of you, is making more connections among more students, whether it's through Enactus Plus or something more meaningful and interactive, so that you're learning from each other, because you have much more to teach one another than I have to teach you. Absolutely, without a doubt. So our goal at Enactus was, how do we create an Enactus World Cup that more people would come to? But it was really hard to adapt. So consider this, our team is very small. Our Enactus World Cup team, our core team, is just a handful of people. That's number one. How do we plan it? How do we find tools that we trust to do it? And then how do we get everybody to agree to what we're going to do? We know we're never going to get everybody to agree with every decision we make. But we were very clear about what we were trying to achieve. And we were trying to achieve a few things. We wanted to test some new programming to give students the opportunity to talk directly to other students. And I know some of you partook in a lot of that. We wanted to bring topics that students told us on the impact survey were important to them to discussion groups, whether it was for students and executives or students only. And we wanted to make sure that the competition could still be done as well as we could without being in person. So those were our three guiding principles. And the only way to bring everybody to the same page was to share our guiding principles and then ask them to contribute to an event that would advance those principles. And so we saw it come to life in a variety of ways. And I'm so sad we did not do our job very well. We only had 7,000 students online over those several days. Now, some students came for an hour, some came every day for all of the programming. But our goal next year is to really create a global community online. And so we're going to be asking you through your country operations and through your teams what you would do differently. The biggest challenge for Enactus World Cup Online is creating access for people, especially students in countries where Wi-Fi. That's our biggest challenge. We have lots of opportunities ahead, but the question is, and I'd like to hear from you right now, is Enactus World Cup just a competition, or could it be something more? And I think it could be something much more, and the competition could just be one element. But I'd like to hear your thoughts, because some of you have been to an Enactus World Cup. I suspect many of you have not. And the way I describe my first experience at the Enactus World Cup is it was like going to the Olympics of social innovation. It was so amazing. I mean, people from all over the world who I would never otherwise have a chance to meet, including a young woman from the Ukraine that I still stay in touch with all these years later, because she had a very clear point of view about what she was trying to achieve and really wanted help with it, and was very passionate. I got to know her very well and mentored her over the many years. And so now I have this network of friends in the Ukraine I would have never had I not gone to the Enactus World Cup. So for all of you, first of all, for those who've been to this year's Enactus World Cup, what did you attend, and was it of value to you? Let me start there. Anybody? Yes.
I can share. So a few years back, actually, it was my dream to actually fly to Enactus World Cup to watch everyone. Unfortunately, because due to the fact that only the winners from National Cup are able to go to the Enactus World Cup, so that's why me myself we couldn't able to attend. And then so fortunately we got this to this year's online section for the Enactus World Cup. So I was like so excited, and then do my best to actually accommodate most of the events. So from there actually I gained a lot, and I met a lot of people. And for example, like Marissa from Germany and Abdi from Iran, that actually this is our 4th or 5th time we met. This, I mean, it's very I'm very grateful for the effort that I put in, and for the Enactus core team to put in this effort to make it happen.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Marissa, you were nodding your head. Your comments?
I can just agree. Now it's like 2 months ago, and I'm still connected with a lot of people from there, and we have video sessions and talk to each other about the stuff we do, and it's so inspiring. And no matter where we are, or if we have the financial stuff to go there, so I think it's great, and it worked out very well.
I'm glad to hear that. One of the things I would love to hear from all of you is what we've started to think about, which is, as you said earlier, we have a lot of rules in our competition, and they're there for a reason. But I'd like to create many other ways for students to come together and learn from each other and advance impact. And one of them is, what if we opened up a track, and it was still a competition with some parameters, right? So we had standards of impact you had to hit, but what if we created that in ways that incented students to work together in different markets, different campuses, and different countries? So we talk about scaling social enterprises all the time, right? And we know the challenges of scaling social enterprises. Very few social enterprises scale successfully. Sometimes that is because the problem you're trying to address, you define in your own market, right? I know the issues in my city, and I know them very, very well. And I know they exist in other cities and in fact in other countries, but the dynamics that influence them are differently. So if I were to create a social enterprise here and define the problem set by Minneapolis standards, even if the core problem is the same, the solution might be different in Germany, But if I were working with you and we both were compelled by this issue, this challenge that existed everywhere, and we could build something that addressed different markets, we could scale from launch. And so I'm really interested in figuring out how could we create a system at Enactus through Enactus World Cup that encouraged you to work together